The gym was packed with the usual noise, squeaking sneakers, the echo of a basketball hitting the hardwood, and the shouts of my teammates. I was in my zone, focused on the game. Then I saw him. He was standing near the exit, half hidden behind a canvas he was holding. Disheveled black hair, those deep hazel eyes. He was the last person I expected to see at a basketball game. And yet, there he was, completely out of place, but somehow I couldn't look away. "Gio," Ball Henry's voice snapped me back to reality just in time for me to catch a pass and sink a three-pointer. The crowd roared, but all I could think about was the guy with the painting. At halftime, while the team huddled up, I found myself drifting toward the sidelines, pretending to need a breather. I stole a glance in his direction. He was gone, but his painting was propped up against the wall, the colors vibrant and chaotic, almost like it was alive. "Who the hell brings a painting to a game?" I muttered to myself, shaking my head, but I knew I was lying. There was something about that painting. About him. The second half started, but I was off my game. Missed passes, sloppy defense. Coach was going to kill me later. But all I could think about was finding out who that guy was and why he was haunting my thoughts. When the final buzzer sounded, we'd barely scraped by with a win. While the guys celebrated, I slipped away, my feet carrying me toward the art building, as if they had a mind of their own. The door to the art room was ajar. I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open, and there he was, standing in front of his canvas, brush in hand, completely absorbed in his work. I cleared my throat, and he jumped, nearly knocking over a jar of paint. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's fine," he cut in, his voice surprisingly calm, like he was used to being startled. He turned to face me, and for a moment we just stood there, sizing each other up. "You're the guy from the game," I said, stating the obvious, with the painting. "And you're the guy who missed 3 easy shots," he replied, not missing a beat. There was a hint of a smirk on his lips, and damn if it didn't make me want to wipe it off. Or maybe not. "Rough game," I shot back, stepping closer. "What were you doing there?" "Just looking for inspiration," he said, turning back to his painting. "Didn't expect to find it on the court." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just stood there watching him work. His brush strokes were quick, precise, almost angry, but the picture he was creating was anything but chaotic. It was beautiful. He glanced over his shoulder, catching me staring. "Do you want something, or are you just going to watch?" There was something in his tone, challenging, maybe even a little daring. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't back down. Maybe I'm just looking for inspiration, too. He snorted, shaking his head, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. "Curiosity, maybe?" "You should probably get back to your team," he said, turning away again, but his voice was softer this time. "Yeah, probably," I agreed, but I didn't move. Neither did he. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, and for a moment, I wondered what would happen if I crossed that line, whatever line it was. "See you around," I finally said, forcing myself to step back, out of the room. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted, and that maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to see it shift back. The rest of the week was a blur. Practice, classes, the usual routine. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that art room. I saw him. It was like my mind was on a loop, replaying that moment over and over. Friday rolled around, and I found myself lingering in the locker room longer than usual after practice. The guys were heading out, making plans for the weekend, but I was stalling. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to go anywhere, except back to that damn art room. "What's up with you lately?" Gio Henry asked, slapping me on the back as he passed by. "You've been spacing out all week." "Just tired," I lied, forcing a grin. "I'll catch up with you guys later." He gave me a weird look, but didn't push it. I waited until everyone was gone before I grabbed my stuff and headed out. My feet seemed to have a mind of their own, taking me straight to the art building. The halls were empty, the lights dimmed for the evening. I hesitated outside the art room door, my heart thudding in my chest. This was stupid. I shouldn't be here. But before I could talk myself out of it, I pushed the door open. He was there, just like I knew he would be. Same spot, same intense focus on his work. But this time he looked up as soon as I entered, like he'd been expecting me. "Back again?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Didn't think basketball players were into art." "I'm full of surprises," I said, shutting the door behind me. The room felt smaller this time, more intimate. I could smell the paint, see the way his hands were stained with it. He didn't respond, just turned back to his canvas, but I noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, like he was waiting for something. "So what are you working on?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I moved closer. He shrugged, not looking at me. "Just something. Mind if I take a look?" His hand froze mid-brushstroke, and for a moment I thought he was going to tell me to leave. But then he sighed and stepped aside, letting me see the painting. It was intense. Colors clashed and blended, creating something that felt chaotic and controlled at the same time. It was raw, and it made something inside me twist in a way I didn't understand. "It's powerful," I said, and I meant it. "You've got talent." He scoffed, wiping his hands on a rag. "You don't know anything about art?" "Maybe not," I admitted, "but I know when something makes me feel something." He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that made my breath catch. "Why are you here, Gio?" The question hung in the air between us. I didn't have a good answer, at least not one that made sense. "I don't know," I said honestly, taking a step closer. "But I can't stop thinking about you." His eyes flickered with surprise, and maybe something else, something that made the air between us crackle with tension. "Gio, whatever this is, it's a bad idea." I know, I whispered, but I didn't move back. Neither did he. We stood there, inches apart, the unspoken tension building, until it was almost unbearable. Then, without thinking, I reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair out of his eyes. His breath hitched, and in that moment, something snapped. He closed the distance between us, his lips crashing into mine with a desperation that mirrored my own. It wasn't gentle or soft, it was raw, intense, like the painting he'd been working on. My hands found their way to his waist, pulling him closer as the kiss deepened, our breaths mingling in the quiet room. For a moment, nothing else existed, just him, the taste of his lips, the feel of his body pressed against mine. But then, just as suddenly as it started, he pulled away, his eyes wide and panicked. I can't. He stammered, stepping back, putting distance between us. "This is too much, Gio." I was still reeling from the kiss, my mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. "Why not?" I asked, my voice rough with emotion I didn't even fully understand. "Because you're not. This isn't you," he said, looking away, his voice shaky. "You're not like me." "That's what I thought," I admitted, taking a step toward him again, but now, I don't know what to think. He shook his head, grabbing his things in a hurry. "You should go. Forget this happened." "Is that what you want?" I asked, my voice low. He hesitated, his eyes meeting mine for a split second before he turned away. "It doesn't matter what I want," he muttered. "Just go." I stood there, torn between leaving and staying, between walking away and pushing this whatever this was further. But in the end, I turned and walked out, my mind spinning, my heart pounding. As I left the building, the taste of him still lingering on my lips, I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next few days felt like I was living in a fog. My head was in the game, but my heart wasn't. The guys noticed I was missing shots, screwing up plays, getting chewed out by coach more than usual. But none of it seemed to matter because all I could think about was that kiss. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that art room, feeling his lips against mine, his hands on my body. I couldn't shake it, couldn't stop replaying the moment when everything changed. And as much as I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, some part of me knew it wasn't. By the end of the week, I was losing it. I had to see him again, had to figure out what the hell was happening to me. So after practice, instead of going home, I found myself heading back to the art building. My feet moved on their own, like they knew something I didn't. The hallway was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you feel like you were walking into something you couldn't take back. When I reached the art room, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. This was crazy. I was about to walk into something that could blow up my entire life. But even knowing that, I couldn't turn away. I pushed the door open, and there he was, standing by the window, staring out at the darkening sky. He didn't hear me come in, didn't turn around. For a moment I just watched him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hey," I finally said, my voice barely more than a whisper. He flinched, his whole body tensing before he slowly turned to face me. His expression was guarded, like he was expecting me to lash out or throw insults his way. "Gio, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice tight. "I don't know," I admitted, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. I can't stop thinking about what happened." He let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. "It was a mistake," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Was it?" I challenged, moving closer, needing to see his reaction, to understand what he was feeling. Because it didn't feel like one. "It can't happen again," he insisted, but his eyes betrayed him. They were full of conflict, the same confusion that was tearing me apart. "Why not?" I asked, stopping just a foot away from him. "What are you so afraid of?" He looked away, his jaw clenched. "I'm afraid of getting hurt," he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. "And I'm afraid of hurting you." His honesty hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't thought about how much was at stake for both of us. But standing here, so close to him, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't ready to walk away. "I don't want to hurt you," I said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. He flinched but didn't pull away. "But I can't pretend this isn't happening." He stared at me, searching my face like he was trying to figure out if I was serious. "Gio, you're straight. This isn't who you are." I shook my head, feeling the frustration bubble up inside me. "I don't know who I am right now," I admitted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "But I know I don't want to lose whatever this is. I can't just walk away." For a long moment he didn't say anything, his eyes locked on mine. Then, without warning, he grabbed me by the collar and pulled me into a kiss. It wasn't soft or tentative like before. This was hungry, desperate, like he was trying to get all of his confusion and fear out in one go. I kissed him back just as hard, my hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer until there was no space between us. Every touch, every press of his lips against mine felt like fire, burning away everything else until all that was left was him. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing hard, our foreheads resting against each other. "What are we doing?" he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know," I replied, my heart still racing. "But I don't want to stop." He closed his eyes, letting out a shaky breath before nodding slowly. "Okay," he said quietly, and in that moment I knew we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. We stayed like that for a while, just holding on to each other, both of us too scared to let go. When he finally pulled back, his expression was softer, less guarded. "We'll take it slow," he said, his voice a little more steady. "No pressure, no expectations." Yeah, I agreed, knowing it was the only way this could work. Slow. But as I walked out of the art room that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about this was going to be slow. This was a fire, and we were both standing in the middle of it, too far in to get out now. The days that followed were like walking a tightrope. Everything seemed the same on the surface: practice, classes, hanging out with the guys, but underneath, I was a mess. Every time I saw him in the hallways or caught a glimpse of the art room, it was like a jolt to the system, a reminder that things had changed and there was no going back. We kept our distance in public, playing it cool. But the second we were alone, it was like a switch flipped. The tension between us was electric, pulling us together no matter how hard we tried to stay apart. One afternoon, after a brutal practice session, I found myself lingering outside the art room again. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but before I could push it open, the door swung inward, and there he was, standing there with a paintbrush in hand and a smudge of blue on his cheek. "Gio," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and something else, something that made my heart pound in my chest. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, like I hadn't been about to walk in on him like a stalker, just passing by. He smirked, wiping his hands on a rag. "You've been passing by a lot lately." "Yeah," well, I shrugged, stepping into the room and closing the door behind me. The second the latch clicked, the air between us shifted, the tension thickening. "Guess I'm just drawn to this place." "Is that all?" he asked, his eyes locking onto mine. "No," I admitted, taking a step closer. "It's not." His breath hitched, and for a moment we just stood there, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Then, without warning, he grabbed my shirt, pulling me into another kiss. It was rough, needy, like we were both trying to pour all the things we couldn't say into that one moment. I pushed him against the wall, my hands roaming over his body as I kissed him harder, deeper. Everything else melted away: the fear, the confusion, the constant worry that someone would find out. All that mattered was him and the way he made me feel. But then, just as quickly as it started, he pulled back, his breathing ragged. "Gio, wait," he said, his voice shaky. "We have to be careful." I paused, my heart still racing, and nodded. He was right. We couldn't afford to get caught up in this. Not here. Not now. "You're right," I muttered, stepping back, trying to get a grip on myself. "We can't. Not here." He looked at me, his eyes full of the same conflict I felt. "It's getting harder to keep this under wraps," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Every time I see you, it's like, I don't know how to stop." Me neither," I said, the weight of the situation starting to settle in. "But we have to figure it out, or it's going to blow up in our faces." We stood there, the reality of what we were doing sinking in. This wasn't just messing around anymore, this was something bigger, something neither of us could control. The thought of it scared the hell out of me, but it also thrilled me in a way I couldn't explain. "We should slow down," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Take a step back before we do something we can't undo." Yeah, I agreed, even though everything in me wanted to do the exact opposite. Slow down. But as I left the art room that day, my mind was racing. Slowing down wasn't an option anymore, not really. Whatever was happening between us was picking up speed, and deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way his lips felt against mine, the way his body fit perfectly against mine. I knew I should be scared, that I should be pulling away, but instead, all I could think about was the next time we'd be alone together. I tried to convince myself that we could keep it under control, that we could handle this without anyone finding out. But as the days went on, it became harder and harder to hide how I felt. Every time we locked eyes across the hallway, every time our fingers brushed as we passed by each other, the tension between us grew, threatening to spill over at any moment. The more we tried to keep our distance, the more the pressure built, like a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. And the worst part was, I knew that when it did, there would be no going back. The pressure was like a vice around my chest, tightening with every passing day. On the outside, I tried to keep it together, going to practice, hanging out with the guys, pretending everything was normal. But inside, I was a mess. Every time I saw him, every stolen glance or accidental touch, it felt like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, one wrong move away from falling. Then came the night of the big game. Our team was up against our biggest rivals, the Black Phoenix. The gym was packed, the energy electric, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting to him, wondering if he'd be in the crowd, if he'd be watching me. It was stupid, but I couldn't help it. Henry was hyped, slapping me on the back as we took the court. "You ready to crush these guys, Gio?" "Yeah," I muttered, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my gut. "Let's do this." The game started, and it was brutal. Bodies clashed, shouts echoed off the walls, but all I could think about was the art room and how close we'd come to losing control. Every time I glanced at the stands, I found myself searching for him, my focus slipping. Midway through the second quarter, I caught sight of him. He was standing at the back, half hidden in the shadows, watching. Our eyes met, and for a split second, everything else disappeared. My heart lurched in my chest, and I missed the pass Henry threw at me, the ball slipping through my fingers and rolling out of bounds. "Gio, what the hell?" Henry snapped, glaring at me. "Get your head in the game." "Sorry," I muttered, but my eyes were already drifting back to where he stood. He was still watching, his expression unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was angry, worried, or something else entirely, but it didn't matter. All I knew was that I needed to see him, to talk to him, to figure out what the hell was going on between us. The rest of the game was a blur. Somehow we managed to pull off a win, but I wasn't even there mentally. As soon as the final buzzer sounded, I was out of there, ignoring the cheers, the slaps on the back, everything. I didn't care about the victory. All I cared about was finding him. I caught up with him in the hallway just outside the gym. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his face a mix of frustration and something else, something darker. "Gio, you're going to get yourself in trouble," he said, not bothering with a greeting. "I don't care," I shot back, not stopping until I was right in front of him. "I need to talk to you." "About what?" he asked, his tone sharp, defensive. About how you're screwing up your life for something that's never going to work." His words hit like a punch to the gut, but I didn't back down. "That's not fair," I snapped, my voice rising. "You think I'm not scared? You think I don't know this is a mess? But I can't just pretend it isn't happening." He looked away, jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he was going to walk away. But then he turned back to me, his eyes blazing. "Gio, you don't know what you're asking for. This thing between us, it's dangerous." Maybe, I admitted, my voice softer now, more pleading. "But it's real, and I can't keep doing this dance around it. We need to figure out what we're going to do." His expression softened just a fraction, but it was enough. "Gio, I'm scared too," he finally admitted, his voice barely more than a whisper. "But if we keep going like this, someone's going to get hurt." "Maybe," I said, stepping closer, "but I'd rather get hurt knowing I tried than live with not knowing what could have been." For a long moment, he didn't say anything, just stared at me with that intense gaze that always made my heart race. Then, without warning, he grabbed my hand and pulled me into a dark corner of the hallway, out of sight from anyone who might be passing by. "What are we doing?" he muttered, but there was no resistance in his voice, no more fighting it. "I don't know," I whispered back, pressing my forehead against his, feeling the warmth of his breath on my lips. "But I want to find out." And then we were kissing again, more desperate than before, like we were both trying to hold on to something that was slipping through our fingers. It wasn't just about desire anymore, it was about needing each other, about clinging to the one thing that made sense in the middle of all the chaos. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathing hard, he looked at me with a mix of fear and determination. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice shaky but firm. "If we're going to do this, we can't let anyone find out. Not yet." "Agreed," I said, my heart still pounding in my chest. "We'll be careful." But even as I said the words, I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. The pressure was still there, and it was only a matter of time before something gave. And when it did, everything was going to change, whether we were ready for it or not. After that night, things got more complicated. We agreed to be careful, to keep everything low-key, but it was like trying to keep a fire contained with nothing but paper walls. Every time we were near each other, the air crackled with tension, the kind that made it impossible to think straight. We met in secret, always looking over our shoulders, always on edge. It was exhausting, but it was the only way we could be together. The stolen moments in the art room, the quick, desperate kisses in dark corners, it wasn't enough, but it was all we had. The guy started noticing something was off. Henry especially. He'd always been my closest friend, the one who could read me like a book, and lately he'd been giving me these looks like he knew something was up, but couldn't quite put his finger on it. One afternoon, after practice, Henry cornered me in the locker room. The other guys had already cleared out, leaving the two of us alone. I was shoving my gear into my bag when he walked over, arms crossed, a serious look on his face. "Gio, what's going on with you?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "You've been acting weird for weeks now. Is everything okay?" I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to play it cool, but I knew I wasn't fooling him. "You've been distracted," he said, narrowing his eyes at me. "You're not yourself. You keep disappearing. And when you're here, it's like your head is somewhere else. I'm your friend, man. If something's going on, you can tell me." I swallowed hard, the lie sitting heavy on my tongue. "I'm fine, Henry," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a lot on my mind, school, the games, everything. I'm just tired." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push it either. "If you say so," he muttered, though I could tell he wasn't letting it go. "Just don't shut me out, okay?" "Yeah, of course," I said, clapping him on the shoulder, but as he walked away, I couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at my insides. Lying to Henry felt like a betrayal, but I didn't have a choice. There was too much at stake. Later that night, I met up with him, the guy who was the reason my life was spiraling out of control in the art room. It was our usual spot, the only place we could be alone without the risk of being caught. But even there, we were careful. The blinds were drawn, the door locked, like we were trying to hide from the world. "You look stressed," he said as I walked in, his voice soft but tinged with concern. He was leaning against the table, arms crossed, his eyes scanning my face. "Just the usual," I replied, forcing a smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Henry's been asking questions." His expression tightened, worry flickering in his eyes. "You didn't tell him, did you?" Of course not, I said quickly, moving closer, needing to feel the reassurance of his presence. But he knows something's up. I don't know how much longer I can keep this from him. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. This is getting risky, Gio. If people start suspecting, I don't know what'll happen. I knew what he meant. We were balancing on a knife's edge, and one wrong move could send everything crashing down. But despite the fear, despite the risk, I couldn't walk away. We'll figure it out, I said, taking his hand, my thumb brushing over his knuckles. We have to. He looked at me, a mixture of fear and longing in his eyes. I'm scared, Gio, he admitted, his voice barely more than a whisper. I'm scared of what'll happen if people find out, but I'm even more scared of losing this. I pulled him into a hug, holding him close, feeling the tension in his body slowly ease as he relaxed against me. I'm scared too, I confessed, my voice rough with emotion. But we'll make it work. We have to. We stayed like that for a while, wrapped up in each other, the outside world fading away. But even in that moment of quiet, the weight of everything we were hiding pressed down on us. We were playing a dangerous game, and deep down, we both knew it couldn't last forever. When we finally pulled apart, the reality of our situation settled back in. We need to be more careful, he said, his voice firm. No more slip-ups. We can't let anyone get suspicious. Agreed, I said, but the words felt hollow. We could try to be careful, to keep things under control, but I knew it was only a matter of time before something gave. As I left the art room that night, a sinking feeling settled in my gut. We were on thin ice, and the cracks were starting to show. And when it finally broke, I wasn't sure if either of us would be able to pick up the pieces. Things escalated faster than either of us expected. The more we tried to keep things under wraps, the more the tension built, until it was suffocating. We couldn't go on like this, sneaking around, living in constant fear of being found out. It was only a matter of time before something snapped. The tipping point came during the championship game, a huge event, with everyone from the school, and even some from the town, packed into the gym. The stakes were high, the pressure even higher. This was the game we'd been working toward all season, the one that could make or break our team's reputation. But for me, it was just another reminder of how far I'd drifted from the life I used to have. Henry was in full-on captain mode, hyping everyone up, making sure we were all focused. But I wasn't. My mind was somewhere else entirely, and it didn't go unnoticed. Gio, get your head in the game, Henry snapped at me during a timeout. This is it, man. We need you here. Yeah, I know, I muttered, but my heart wasn't in it. I could feel the weight of his eyes on me, the pressure of everyone's expectations, but it all felt distant, like I was watching someone else's life play out. As the game progressed, the tension on the court mirrored what was boiling inside me. The Black Phoenix was tough, aggressive, pushing us to our limits. But the real struggle was the war going on in my head. Every play, every move, felt like a distraction from the real issue, the guy sitting quietly in the stands, watching, hidden among the crowd. Then, in the fourth quarter, everything blew up. We were down by 2, with just minutes left on the clock. Henry passed me the ball, expecting me to make the shot that would tie the game. But my hands were shaking, my focus shot. I saw him again, him in the corner of my eye, and it was like everything else faded away. Gio, shoot, Henry yelled, but it was too late. The ball slipped from my grip, and in that split second, everything went to hell. The Black Phoenix stole the ball, racing down the court for an easy layup. The gym erupted with noise, shouts, boos, everything blending together in a chaotic mess. Henry stormed over to me, his face a mask of frustration. What the hell is wrong with you? He shouted, shoving me hard. You just threw the game. I didn't have an answer. I couldn't even look him in the eye. All I could think about was how everything was crumbling around me, how I was about to lose everything, my friends, my team, and maybe even him. But before I could say anything, Ryan, one of the Black Phoenix players, and a known asshole, came up, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Nice job, Gio, he sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Guess you're not as clutch as everyone thinks. I snapped. All the frustration, fear, and guilt that had been building up inside me exploded. I didn't think I just reacted. My fist connected with Ryan's jaw before I even realized what I was doing. The gym went dead silent, the shockwave of my action rippling through the crowd. Ryan staggered back, clutching his face, but the look in his eyes wasn't just surprise, it was satisfaction. He'd gotten exactly what he wanted. What the hell? Gio, Henry grabbed my arm, pulling me back, but I shook him off. I couldn't think straight, couldn't process what had just happened. All I knew was that I'd crossed a line, one I couldn't uncross. The refs blew the whistle, and the coaches rushed in to break it up, but it was too late. The damage was done. I was ejected from the game, the crowd booing, my teammates looking at me like I'd just betrayed them all. As I was escorted off the court, I caught a glimpse of him standing up now, his face pale, his eyes wide with something that looked a lot like fear. But there was nothing I could do. The world was crashing down around me, and I was powerless to stop it. After the game, the locker room was a tense, silent mess. No one spoke to me, not even Henry. He just sat there, staring at the floor, the disappointment radiating off him in waves. I knew I'd messed up big time. But the worst part was, I didn't regret punching Ryan. Not really. What I regretted was the look on his face, the way he'd watched everything fall apart, knowing that we were both standing on the edge of something we couldn't control. I left the locker room without saying a word to anyone, the weight of my actions pressing down on me like a boulder. I needed to see him, needed to figure out what the hell we were going to do now. But when I reached the art room, it was empty, no sign of him anywhere. Panic set in as I realized that maybe, just maybe, I'd pushed him too far. That maybe this was the breaking point, and there was no going back. As I stood there, alone in the darkened room, the reality of the situation finally hit me. I'd been trying to juggle too much my feelings for him, the pressure of the team, the expectations of everyone around me, and now everything was falling apart. And the worst part? I had no idea how to fix it. The fallout from the championship game hit like a freight train. The school was buzzing with gossip about the punch, about the loss, about me. Everywhere I went, I could feel the stares, hear the whispers. It was like the world had turned against me overnight. Henry avoided me, and when we did cross paths, his silence was louder than any words. I couldn't blame him. I'd let everyone down, including myself. But the worst part was not knowing where he was, not knowing if he'd want anything to do with me after the mess I'd made. I spent most of the weekend holed up in my room, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from teammates, classmates, even coach, all trying to get a piece of me, but I ignored them all. I couldn't face them, not yet. Finally, on Sunday evening, I couldn't take the silence any longer. I needed to see him, to know if he was still willing to stand by me after everything that had happened. I headed to the art building, hoping against hope that he'd be there. When I pushed open the door to the art room, he was sitting on one of the stools, staring at a blank canvas. He didn't look up when I walked in, didn't acknowledge my presence. For a moment, I just stood there, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us. I screwed up. I finally said, my voice hoarse from days of not speaking. I don't know how to fix this. He glanced at me, his expression unreadable, but there was no anger in his eyes, just exhaustion. You did, he said quietly, his voice flat. And now everyone's paying the price. I flinched at the bluntness of his words, but I knew he was right. I couldn't help it, I admitted, taking a step closer, desperate for him to understand. Ryan was pushing me, and I lost it. He sighed, setting down his paintbrush. Gio, this isn't just about the game. It's about everything. You've been spiraling for weeks, and now it's all catching up with you. With us. The way he said us made my chest tighten. I don't want to lose you, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. But I don't know how to make this work. I'm trying, but it's not enough, he finished for me, standing up and facing me fully. Gio, I'm scared. I'm scared of what's going to happen if we keep this up, but I'm even more scared of what'll happen if we don't. I reached for him, pulling him into a hug, holding on like he was the only thing keeping me grounded. I don't know what to do, I whispered, my voice breaking. Everything's falling apart, and I can't stop it. He hugged me back, his grip tight, like he was holding on for dear life. We can't keep doing this in the dark, hiding from everyone. It's tearing you apart. It's tearing us apart. I pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes, seeing the fear and resolve mirrored in his gaze. What do you want to do, I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He hesitated, biting his lip like he was debating something deep inside. We need to stop hiding, he finally said, his voice firm. If this is going to work, we have to be honest about everything. With ourselves, with each other, with everyone. The thought of coming clean, of letting the world in on what we had, terrified me. But looking at him, Seeing the determination in his eyes, I knew he was right. We couldn't keep living like this, constantly on edge, always looking over our shoulders. "Are you sure?" I asked, needing to hear him say it again. He nodded, his expression softening as he reached up to touch my face. "Yeah, I'm sure. I don't want to keep pretending, Gio, not anymore. If this is real, if we're real, then we need to face it together." I took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling over me. This was at the moment where everything could change. The moment where we could stop hiding and start living for real, no matter the consequences. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "We'll do it. Together." He smiled, a small, tentative thing, but it was enough to make my heart lift just a little. "Together," he echoed, and in that moment, I knew we were making the right choice. It wasn't going to be easy. We'd have to deal with the fallout, with the questions, the judgments, the risks. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like we had a real chance at making this work. We stayed there for a while longer, just holding on to each other, letting the fear and uncertainty wash away. There was still so much to figure out, so much that could go wrong, but for now we had each other. And that was enough. The next morning, the reality of what we were about to do hit me like a freight train. As I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my teeth, I couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. Today wasn't just another day today. Everything was going to change. After my conversation with him in the art room, we'd both agreed that we couldn't keep hiding. It was time to come clean, no matter the consequences. But knowing that didn't make it any easier. The fear of what people would say, how they would react, it gnawed at me, making my hands tremble as I tried to focus on getting ready for school. When I got to the school parking lot, I saw him waiting by the entrance. He looked as nervous as I felt, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his eyes darting around like he expected someone to jump out and accuse us at any moment. "Hey," I said, walking up to him, trying to keep my voice steady. "You ready?" He looked at me, a mix of fear and determination in his eyes. "No," he admitted, his voice shaky. "But we've got to do this." "Yeah," I agreed, taking a deep breath. "We do." We walked into the school together, side by side. It felt like everyone was watching us, even though I knew it was just my paranoia kicking in. Still, the tension was thick, every whisper in the hallway seeming louder, every glance sharper. When we got to our lockers, Henry was already there, his face tight with the kind of worry that only comes from knowing someone too well. He looked between us, his brow furrowing as if he was trying to piece something together. "Gio, we need to talk," Henry said, his voice low, serious. "Yeah, we do," I replied, exchanging a glance with him, the silent agreement passing between us. It was time. We headed to a quiet corner of the school, somewhere out of the way where we could talk without the whole school overhearing. Henry stood there waiting, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "What's going on?" Henry asked, cutting right to the chase. "You've been acting weird for weeks, and now this, what the hell is happening, Gio?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could both hear it. "Henry, there's something you need to know," I started, my voice trembling slightly. "Something I haven't been honest about." Henry's eyes flicked between us, suspicion dawning. "What is it?" he asked, his tone a mix of concern and frustration. I looked at him, then at Henry, feeling the weight of the moment bearing down on me. "We've been seeing each other," I said, finally, the words hanging in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. Henry's reaction was immediate. His eyes widened and he took a step back, as if he'd been physically hit. "What?" he asked, his voice full of disbelief. You're together." "Yes," I said, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. "It's been going on for a while, but we didn't know how to tell you. Or anyone." Henry stared at us, his expression shifting from shock to something more complicated: hurt, anger, confusion, all rolled into one. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice rising. "I'm your best friend, Gio. How could you keep this from me?" Because I didn't know how, I admitted, my voice breaking. "I was scared, Henry. Scared of what this meant, scared of how you'd react, scared of everything." "And now?" Henry asked, his tone sharp, demanding an answer. "And now I'm tired of hiding," I said, the words coming out stronger than I expected. "I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to keep lying to you, or to myself." Henry looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine for something: truth, maybe, or some kind of explanation that made sense. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to deal with this," he said honestly. "I'm pissed, Gio. Pissed that you didn't trust me enough to tell me sooner. But I'm your friend, and if this is who you are, if this is what you want, then I'll try to understand." Relief washed over me, so intense that I almost felt dizzy. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "That means more than you know." Henry nodded, but his expression was still troubled. "But this isn't going to be easy," he warned. "People are going to talk. You know that, right?" "Yeah," I said, glancing at him, who was standing quietly beside me, his face a mix of relief and anxiety. "We know, but we'll handle it." The bell rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. Henry gave us one last look before heading off to class, leaving us standing there alone. "You okay?" I asked, turning to him. "Yeah," he replied, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. It's really happening, isn't it?" "It is," I said, taking his hand in mine, squeezing it gently. "But we're doing this together, remember?" He nodded, a small, tentative smile playing on his lips. Together. As we walked to our next class, hand in hand, the weight of what we'd just done settled over us. There was no going back now. The world knew, or it soon would, and we'd have to face whatever came next. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was hiding anymore. I wasn't running from my feelings, from who I was, or from the people I cared about. And as scary as that was, it was also freeing. We weren't alone in the dark anymore. We were standing in the light, together, ready to face whatever the world threw at us. The news spread faster than I expected. By lunch, the entire school seemed to know. Everywhere we went, there were whispers, stares, and the occasional pointed finger. I could feel the eyes on us as we walked through the cafeteria, the murmurs growing louder with every step. Henry stuck by us, his presence a silent but solid show of support. But even he couldn't shield us from everything. The reality of what we'd done, what we'd revealed, was hitting harder than I'd imagined. We sat at our usual table, but nothing about it felt usual. The guys were quieter than normal, throwing us awkward glances, unsure of what to say. I didn't blame them. Hell, I didn't know what to say either. So we just ate in silence, the tension hanging over us like a storm cloud ready to burst. As we were finishing up, Ryan and his crew walked by. I could feel the hostility radiating off him before he even opened his mouth. "Well, look who finally came out of the closet," Ryan sneered, loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. The laughter from his friends was sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. I felt a surge of anger, but before I could react, Henry stood up, his jaw set, ready to defend me. But I grabbed his arm, stopping him. This was something I had to handle myself. "Yeah, Ryan, we did," I said, standing up and facing him. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "Got a problem with that?" Ryan smirked, looking me up and down with that same sneer. "Just surprised you had the balls to admit it. Didn't think you'd be man enough." "That's where you're wrong," I shot back, my voice calm but firm. "It takes more guts to be honest than to hide behind insults. You can say whatever you want, but it doesn't change who I am." The smirk faded from Ryan's face, replaced by something harder, angrier. For a moment I thought he was going to throw a punch, but he just scoffed and walked away, his friends trailing after him like lost puppies. As they left, the cafeteria fell into a strange, tense silence, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. But when nothing did, the noise slowly resumed, conversations picking back up, though the stares didn't stop. Henry clapped me on the shoulder, a look of approval in his eyes. "Nice one, Gio." I nodded, but inside I was still reeling. This was just the beginning. We'd won this round, but I knew there'd be more to come, more whispers, more confrontations, more of everything that came with being different in a place that didn't always understand. When the school day finally ended, I felt drained. Every interaction, every glance had been charged with tension, like everyone was waiting for us to break, to back down. But we hadn't. And I was proud of that, even if it left me exhausted. As we walked out of the building, him by my side, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and dread. We'd made it through the day, but the real test was just beginning. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, concerned. "Yeah," I replied, though I wasn't sure if it was true. "It's just a lot, you know." He nodded, his hand brushing against mine as we walked. I know, but we're in this together, remember. Together, I echoed, the word giving me strength. We reached the parking lot, and for a moment we just stood there, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us. I turned to him, seeing the same mixture of fear and determination in his eyes that I felt in my own. "This isn't going to be easy," I said, stating the obvious but needing to say it out loud. "No, it's not," he agreed, a small, sad smile tugging at his lips. "But it's worth it." "Yeah," I said, taking his hand and squeezing it tight. "It is." We stood there for a moment longer, just holding on to each other, letting the noise of the world fade into the background. This was our new reality, messy, complicated, and far from perfect. But it was ours, and we were going to fight for it. Finally, we both got into our cars, the reality of the day settling in. But as I drove away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. We'd taken the first step, and no matter what came next, we were ready. At home, I sat on my bed, staring at my phone. I knew I needed to make another call, one I'd been putting off all day. With a deep breath, I dialed the number and waited. Gio, my mom's voice was warm, familiar, and suddenly I felt like a little kid again, scared of what she might say. "Hey Mom," I said, my voice shaky. "I need to tell you something." There was a pause on the other end, the kind that made my stomach twist. "Okay," she said, her tone cautious. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, closing my eyes as I spoke the words. I'm seeing someone. And it's a guy." The silence on the other end was deafening, stretching on for what felt like an eternity. But when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, steady. "Gio, I love you. No matter what, okay, we'll figure this out together." I exhaled, the tension in my chest easing just a bit. "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." We talked for a while longer, the conversation awkward at times but filled with love and understanding. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. And that was enough. When I hung up, I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. We weren't done, there was still so much to navigate, so much to figure out, but we'd taken the first steps, and that was all we could do for now. Lying in bed that night, I thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the anger, the courage it took to finally be honest with the people who mattered. It wasn't the end of the story. In many ways, it was just the beginning. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path, and as long as we were walking it together, I knew we'd be okay.